Hello everyone, my name's Cliff and welcome back to my channel. This is Cliff's Dark Gems. Today I'm going to be showing off my somewhat trashy, somewhat pulpy Dean Koontz collection. Stay tuned. Okay everyone, Dean Koontz is quite a prolific author. He's written over 120 novels, and that's a lot more than Stephen King as far as I know. However, as far as I'm concerned, he has not put out the same quality as many of my favourite authors. That being said, there are still a handful of books that he's written in the 70s and the 80s that I really enjoyed. So let's go through from the earliest to the latest that I own. And also, it's not the biggest collection in the world. I think when I was younger I used to own a lot more. But yeah, if there's any that you think that I should read, other than the handful that I have read, even if I don't own them, our little second-hand bookstore has quite a wide selection of Dean Koontz, so it wouldn't be any problem for me to go down there and try and find some suggestions from you, the audience. Okay, let's get started. First of all, we have one of his first novels, and that is Icebound. And now, I cannot remember if I've read this, and that is another thing that I've got to say about Dean Koontz. Stephen King once said that he likens his books, which in the early days were also pretty trashy, he likens his books to a cheeseburger, a McDonald's cheeseburger. Now, the way I see it with Dean Koontz, he's also the kind of fast food sort of burger kind of person, but whereas I can go into McDonald's and I'll eat a cheeseburger or a Big Mac, and I get that craving from time to time, and I remember what McDonald's looks like, I remember how the cheeseburger and the Big Mac tastes, and you kind of get a craving for it, but you remember the taste, you remember the kind of thing that it gave you. With Dean Koontz, it's not the same thing. With Dean Koontz, for me, it's like eating a burger from an unknown restaurant, some unknown fast food outlet, and then you leave and you can't remember the name of the burger, you can't remember the taste, you can't remember the name of where you got the burger. But you do remember that at the time, it was pretty damn tasty. And that has been my experience of Dean Koontz. When I was a teen, I would actually read a number of his stories and I would be excited, I'd be thrilled. I would love the story, but then a month later, 2 months later, never mind the fact that I'm 52 now, but down the line you just don't remember anything about the plot or the characters. Whereas with Stephen King, I remember he has written some not so good novels, but in his best novels like It and The Stand and The Shining, you remember the story, you remember the plot, you remember the characters. They're memorable, they're unforgettable, the best ones. And so yeah, that for me is the biggest difference between Stephen King and Dean Koontz. So a lot of these I either have read and can't remember, or I've read them, the ones that I can remember, I'll let you know. But the big thing about this is that I want you to tell me, if you love Dean Koontz, what books should I pick if I'm going to go forward? Because I do feel like reading a bit more of him this year. I have also heard that his earlier work is far superior to his later work. And when I was looking around online, I figured out that there was one book in particular that I own, where there's kind of a turning point in his career, where he starts to change the way that he writes. But we'll get to that later. Okay, so the first one is Icebound by Dean Koontz. And now this is something about a widespread drought causing massive famine, and there's an idea to cut away the Arctic ice or blow the Arctic ice and to bring it there so that there's water again. So yeah, it's a bit of a wild plot, a wild storyline, which I think he's actually well known for. But yeah, I haven't read this, I don't think. If you'd recommend it, let me know. That is Icebound. Next up we have The Key to Midnight. Now I'm pretty sure that I've read this, but once again I remember absolutely nothing. The back says, Who is Joanna Rand? Alex Hunter hasn't come to Japan to fall in love, but Joanna Rand is the most beautiful, exciting woman he has ever met. Oh, and that's another thing. One thing you can expect from Dean Koontz is sex. He does, in a number of his novels, put in some kind of cringy sex scenes, and a lot of his novels are not horror, they're more suspense stroke horror. Yet Joanna is not who she thinks she is. 10 years before, and halfway across the world, a brutally bizarre experiment recreated her mind. A violation so hideous that her dreams are filled with terror and her memories are a lie. Okay, and my memory tells me that I haven't read this book. That is The Key to Midnight. And these are still early Dean Koontz. Next one is The Voice of the Night. And this one is about a terrifying call from the dark side of the man's psyche. The voice of the night can transform childhood fantasy into terrifying reality. If you listen to the voice, you may never see the dawn again. Yeah, so it sounds quite fun, sounds fun, but once again it sounds more like a thriller. That is The Voice of the Night. Next up, we have a book that I'm absolutely certain that I've read. And I love fun houses and carnivals. It's Dean Koontz, The Fun House. Now this cover I need to actually fix because it's completely separate from the book. But yeah, this is about a carnival and it looks kind of actually quite deep. It's like family secrets and a carnival comes to town. And I can't remember it, but I think I remember reading it when I was a teenager. So I maybe have to give it a reread. And just, as I said, all the books I read as a teenager, I enjoyed. But then as fast as I enjoyed them, bye-bye, they're gone. That is The Fun House. Okay, next, this is a bit of a modern cover. Next up, and I think these are all 80s, 90s, this is The Eyes of Darkness. Yeah, it's been a year of unbelievable heartache since her son Danny's death. Now the Vegas show that she directed is about to premiere, so she vows to put her grief behind her. Only there's a message for Tina scrawled on the chalkboard in Danny's room. 2 words that will send Tina on a terrifying journey. Not dead. This sounds vaguely familiar. In fact, this sounds very familiar. And I haven't put any of these on Goodreads because I just can't remember them. But I think if I dip into this again, I might remember some of the storyline. And that is The Eyes of Darkness. Okay, let's hope those don't fall. Okay, next up we have a book that I definitely remember. And this was an awesome read. I don't remember too much about the plot, but I do remember absolutely loving Watchers by Dean Koontz. And in fact, this is a book that is spoken about by many people online as his best book, I think besides Odd Thomas. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. And this is where he comes in with his golden retriever. You can see at the back. There apparently was a rescue that was given to him. And yeah, I think this was a fabulous story. That the dog at the beginning protects him from some monster that is out to threaten him, and it's a government conspiracy. And yeah, I can't remember too much more than that, but this was a very, very good read. This is top class Koontz, The Watchers. Okay, then another one that I remember reading and I really enjoyed, and that is A Bad Place. I can't remember all the details. It's a man who can't sleep, and there's all sorts of dreadful things that are happening. And in fact, I think The Bad Place itself is, yeah, pretty horrifying. But I do really remember enjoying this book, and so it will definitely be in my top 5 or top 3 of Dean Koontz, and that is The Bad Place. And next up we have my favorite Dean Koontz, and I've spoken about this in my top 10 horrors of all time. Although some of you will probably think that this is more like a psychological thriller, I found this book absolutely amazing, and that was Dean Koontz's Intensity. This is definitely one of his best books, and I think it's I remember the plot so clearly because it's more simplistic. I wouldn't call it simplistic in the sense that it doesn't have depth, but it is a serial killer, and it is the serial killer's potential victim that has to fight back towards the serial killer. And in terms of a protagonist and an antagonist, these are two of the most memorable characters I can ever think of. In fact, in all of Koontz, in everything I've read by Koontz, I remember these characters. Edla Voss, the psychopath, and China, who is the woman who has to go after the psychopath, because apparently the psychopath is keeping a young woman imprisoned for, I'm not going to go into more details. This man is psycho mad. He is horrible, and he will do anything to live with intensity. He will hurt anyone, he will harm anyone, he will kill anyone, and he delights in the torture and hurt of other people. I found this a very intense book. Okay, next up, I think this is the last one I got of his earlier stuff. I've got barely 20 novels here. He's written 120, so this is not a massive collection, but yeah, if I start enjoying him again, I will buy a few more of his early stuff in particular. And this is Soul Survivor, and I think it's about a plane crash, yes, and there's a sole survivor of a plane crash, and the survivor has got a secret that can change the world. That's all I know about it. Fast paced apparently, but yeah, Soul Survivor. Now we're getting into the Dean Koontz book that apparently from here on in he brings a lot of his stuff. I think he becomes more religious, maybe more political, I'm not sure, I don't know all the details with that, but his books become, as far as I can see, more formulaic, and that turns a lot of people off. The more he writes, they just seem to think that he just writes the same old thing over and over again. Unlike, in my mind, someone like Stephen King, who really changes the way he writes from the year 2000 onwards. You know, he came up with that awesome novel 11/22/63. Dean Koontz has done nothing even close to that, as far as I know, unless I stand corrected. Okay, From the Corner of His Eye. And this is about a boy, I think at the age of 3, who's got cancer, and the doctors have to take out his eyes in order to save him. And then miraculously, at a later stage, he can see again. So there's this idea of rebirth. I think he does bring religion or something into his books over and over again. But yeah, I haven't read it. It's a big chunker of a novel. If you recommend it, there goes the Hardy-Dars again. If you recommend it, please let me know. That is From the Corner of His Eye. And then the next one I got is also a big chunker, and that is called False Memory. And actually, as I say, I have no idea about any of these books. Marty Rhodes, a happily married, successful video games editor, takes an agoraphobic friend to therapy sessions twice a week. Each trip is a grim ordeal, but the experience has brought the two friends even closer. Then one morning, Marty experiences a brief, irrational, but disquieting fear of her shadow. That's interesting. That's different. When autophobia, one of the rarest and most intriguing phobias known to psychology, is diagnosed, suddenly, radically, her life changes and the future looks dark. Okay, so sounds interesting, but if I'm going to get back into Koontz, it will be early Koontz, not late Koontz, unless one of you tells me a really, really good book from the latter part of his career. Next up we have, now you can see the covers get a bit boring, and they're almost the same, the next 5 covers, but we've got By the Light of the Moon. I'm not going to talk too much about any of these. Basically, there's autism, there's stardom. Oh, the doctor takes victims and he warns them that he's being pursued and that they are now targets as well. If they are caught, they will be killed. Yeah, so this sounds much more like a suspense novel. and that's By the Light of the Moon. Next up, almost an identical cover, Dean Koontz, The Face. And now I really think we're getting into the latter part of his career where people are getting sick of him, to be blunt. As Hollywood's most dazzling star, he has the love of millions, but the hatred of one deeply twisted soul. Just before Christmas, the star has received 6 messages promising a very nasty surprise. Okay, that is The Face. We're going through these quite quickly. Next up we have The Taking. Now I believe he did a book earlier on in his career called The Mist. No, that's Stephen King. The Fog maybe. That is supposed to be very, very good. And apparently this was a bit of a rip-off of that. On the morning that will mark the end of the world they have known, it's a small town and terrible things happen. And I think that's exactly what happens in this earlier book. Oh, I think it was Phantoms. Lightning or Phantoms, which I've both read. But yeah, I think he revisits old territory with The Taking. Now, the next one I heard is actually very good. From online, from looking at top Koontz books, I've heard that The Husband is one of his best, the best of his later works. Please let me know. And this is So We Have Your Wife. You get her back for 2 million cash. Man, you aren't listening. I'm a gardener. We know. This is nuts. Where would I get 2 million bucks from? You'll find a way. Okay, so that's him trying to find his wife and raise the money to get her back. And yeah, probably a nice thriller, The Husband. And finally, from my tiny collection, and I have no idea about this either, is Your Heart Belongs to Me. Now, there's all little hearts here. You're dead, be mine. Ryan Perry never expected to find himself on a waiting list for a heart transplant, with time running out. So when miraculously he receives a new heart and the transplant is a success, he thinks his troubles are over. A year later he has never felt so good. And then comes a terrifying threat. Okay, so I think what happens is that they threaten to take everything away from him, and it all has to do with his heart that's beating in his chest. That is, Your Heart Belongs to Me. Okay everyone, so that's my slightly trashy, slightly pulpy Dean Koontz collection. Let me know what you think. In the comments below, tell me if you've read any of these. If you're a Dean Koontz fan, where should I look next? And please like and subscribe if you enjoy this content. Take care of yourselves, keep those pages turning, and cheers.